morning, everybody. Happy Thursday. Have an amazing show for everybody today. What do we have, Krystal?
Indeed we do. As you guys probably already know, Zohran Mamdani has shocked the establishment in New York City and nationwide. So we have some updates for you there, including Andrew Cuomo is dropping his bid. So what does this mean for the general election? And also the big freak out is on. We got the Republican freak out. We got the business CNBC freak out. We got the Democratic establishment freak out. And I'm also really excited to get Saagar's take on the whole thing and what it all means. Also, lots of news continuing to unfold with regard to Iran. The great Scott Horton is going to join us to break the latest down. The Ayatollah has emerged with a message. There's actually a press conference going on today with Pete Hegseth as the Trump administration continues to insist that those strikes were successful in obliterating Iran's nuclear program. So we will get all of those details. Also, a couple of interesting media appearances. One from Joy Reid, who dropped some real truth bombs on CNN, I guess, now that she's unshackled from MSNBC. It's interesting to watch her go. So we'll play that. And we also had a great Candace Owens clip from Piers Morgan that we will break down as well. In addition, we want to keep our eye on the fact that the one big beautiful bill is moving. President Trump is pushing for this to be passed rapidly, in spite of the fact that some Republican leaders are expressing deep concern about the political fallout of the Medicaid cuts. Also have a couple of additional interesting media segments. So Bernie Sanders joined Joe Rogan, got some clips from that. And another Joe Rogan linked segment we're going to do here. So disgraced men's lifestyle influencer, Liver King, was just arrested for making terroristic threats against Joe Rogan. So we'll break down all of that for you. It's just a wild story. He has clearly had a complete mental break at this point.
Absolutely. And for those asking what the tie-in is because this show actually was featured in the Liver King Netflix documentary at the end. And so we have to bring things even more full circle by continuing our coverage of the situation. Also, it's been a really very serious 2 weeks. So, you know, let's do something nice.
Let's lighten it up with a little terroristic
Let's lighten it up a little bit. But I mean, it's always fun to see an influencer fall from grace and in handcuffs. I'm sorry, I've been waiting for it. So
I mean, especially this guy is a complete and total
He's
charlatan,
a total con artist.
But yeah, if you guys haven't watched, I watched the Netflix documentary on Liver King last night with Kyle, and I knew your monologue was in it.
Yes.
But it really was like the whole thing built.
I have not watched it. I've only heard this from other
monologue
people.
is like the the conclusion that wraps the whole thing up is pretty cool.
As you guys, that's why you guys watch the show. You're ahead of the curve.
There you go.
We were one of the only news channels that actually covered it at that time. And no, it wasn't for clicks. I had been fascinated by the story for quite a long time. All right, let's get to Zohran. You guys did a great job of covering all the election results live, but a lot has happened since then. So
yes, indeed. So to back up, we'll start with Zohran Mamdani, his victory speech, just to get a flavor of what he was talking about as he clinched the Democratic primary victory. Let's go ahead and take a listen to a little bit of that.
Tonight, we made history. In the words of Nelson Mandela, it always seems impossible until it is done. And I want to thank Brad Lander. Together we have shown the power of the politics of the future. As FDR said, democracy has disappeared in several other great nations. Not because the people disliked democracy, but because they had grown tired of unemployment and insecurity, of seeing their children hungry while they sat helpless in the face of government confusion and weakness. In desperation, they chose to sacrifice liberty in the hope of getting something to eat. New York, if we have made one thing clear over these past months, it is that we need not choose between the two. We can be free and we can be fed. We can demand what we deserve. And together we have built a movement where everyday New Yorkers recognize themselves in our vision of democracy.
So you get a little taste there of the talent and the rhetoric that helped to lead to this completely shocking, pretty overwhelming success here for Zohran. Let's go ahead and put this up on the screen in terms of the coalition that he built, because there are some really interesting numbers here and some really interesting things to glean. You really have to kind of discard some of the expectation was this would be, heavily leaning on white college-educated and Asian college-educated voters. The way he was able to win with such stunning, overwhelming force, and in the first round, which people didn't really expect. I mean, technically it hasn't been called yet. It's got to go to ranked choice voting, but Cuomo's already conceded. He did best in racially mixed precincts here. Cuomo did best in precincts which were either heavily white or heavily black. So in the more mixed areas of the city, that is where Mamdani did the best. Let's go ahead and put the next piece up on the screen here about the class coalition he was able to build. And Saagar, this was, to me, some of the most fascinating breakdowns that we saw were in terms of the class demographics that made up Mamdani's base. So Cuomo did the best among the very poor and among the very rich. Mm-hmm. So billionaire class, all in for Cuomo. Mamdani was strongest among the sort of broad middle, so the working class and middle class in New York City. And keep in mind, in New York City, because it is so expensive, the middle class is a little bit higher income than what it would be considered nationwide. But that's really where he had his strength. And then we don't have these numbers, but there was also obviously a massive generational divide. And that was perhaps the most significant divide in this entire race, is Mamdani was so strong with young voters and did something that, the Bernie campaign promised to do, that leftist campaigns often promise to do, which is to shift the demographics of the people who actually turn out. It appears that Zohran, in addition to winning groups that he wasn't necessarily expected to and building inroads into groups he wasn't expected to, he also did change the composition of the electorate, where it was much younger than typical New York City mayoral elections ultimately are, and that's how he's able to secure this victory.
It's very interesting. There's a lot of, he's the real candidate of the rich and he's a candidate of the poor. Again, I would remind somebody that if you make this is going to sound crazy for people who are in Alabama. If you make $100,000 in Manhattan, you're basically rent poor. It's like you're effectively like paycheck to paycheck.
You're working class.
No, look, again, I know this sounds nuts to everybody else who lives, but if you've ever lived in New York, I mean, I'm serious, like $100,000, and you have to think about state, local, and federal, what you're left home with, and then what the average rent is for even a 1 or a 2 bedroom apartment. Good luck to you being able to even go out to eat like a couple of times. So that's my, first kind of thing. But also, at the same time, I do find the quibbling really annoying because you can kind of find a narrative wherever it is. Like, Cuomo won, the majority of black voters, and there was a big, racial split. Mamdani did very well in a lot of these mixed districts. At the end of the day, I don't think it really matters all that much. The only thing it means is winning the primary, and we will also find out during the general election what his general broad appeal is. But also, look, I mean, all of this, working class, non-working class, it's like, guys, the only thing that matters is winning. And, Donald Trump, yes, he won many working class voters, Latino voters, etc. He won a lot of rich people too, like middle class as well. In fact, middle class suburbanites, if they hadn't voted for Trump, he would not have won the popular vote election, right? So just taking the coalition for what it is, I mean, look, it's not a surprise. The Democratic Party broadly appeals to people who are college educated. If you've been watching this show for the last 5 years, then you would know that. Having a 4-year bachelor college degree is one of the major signs of being liberal. It just is what it is. And so when you put that into a city like New York with one, I can't even imagine, the median income, I believe, on the island of Manhattan is $102,000 per year. That's a median income. And then actually, if you restrict it and you leave out, I think some parts of above a certain street, it skyrockets even higher. Well, what do you think they all do? They're all highly college educated. Of course, they're Democratic voters. So yeah, I mean, we can make quite a bit of this whole working class, black or whatever. But to me, the only thing that matters is winning, and the guy won. So it doesn't really matter. At the end of the day, how he will perform in the general election is, of course, an open question. We have the news about Andrew Cuomo. Is he officially not running? That's what it was a bit confusing.
Let's put A4 up on the screen.
Let's put it up there.
So just to explain, in New York, there are multiple ballot lines.
Yes.
And Andrew Cuomo already was going to be on one of the non-Democratic Party ballot lines for the fall. So the expectation very much was that if he lost in the Democratic primary, he would continue on to the fall. But that expectation was built at a time when it was expected either he would win or that it would be very close. It ends up not being close. In fact, the margin of victory in the first round ranked choice vote is going to only be, it's only going to grow when they actually factor in ranked choice vote, because the third place candidate, Brad Lander, cross-endorsed Mamdani, and his campaign told us that some 80 to 90% of Brad Lander votes are ultimately going to end up with Mamdani. So in the wake of that crushing defeat, humiliating, I mean, you can't even put words to it how humiliating this is for Andrew Cuomo. Then it goes, maybe he's not going to be able to continue. And in fact, it looks like, according to sources within the Cuomo camp, he is going to drop his New York City mayoral bid, in New York Post phrasing here, after blistering primary defeat to Zohran Mamdani. And I think probably one of the things that happened here, put A4B up on the screen, is that a lot of his donors started to pull the plug. They're like, you know what, dude? You got your ass kicked by a 33-year-old who came out, Democratic Socialist, Muslim, who came out of nowhere from 1% of the vote, and he beat you. And we threw $26 million in Super PAC ads against this guy, and you got your butt kicked. So listen to this, though. This is remarkable. One of these big donors says, you know what, I was just backing Cuomo, not because I like the guy, but because I thought he was going to win, and he's transactional, and so I needed to make my corrupt deal. Specifically, he says, this is Mark Gordon, that he's now likely to back Mamdani. That's because of the support Mamdani got from Brad Lander, who Gordon said he ranked first, quote, I feel like people misunderstood my $250K for Cuomo for real enthusiasm. It was basically, oh, looks like Cuomo's coming back. We don't want to be shut out. Let's try and get on his good side. That's kind of how things work with Cuomo. It's sad political pragmatism. I wish we lived in a world where those sorts of things were not useful things to do. The other thing I noted, Saagar, is that Bill Clinton, who had endorsed Andrew Cuomo and even recorded a robocall for him and was, I guess, his highest profile endorsement. He also came out and said, and was wishing Zohran good luck in November. So that was an indication to me as well. But, this is the thing for Cuomo, too. Like, not only did you get humiliatingly defeated, not only did you run one of the most piss-poor campaigns that all the New York experts say they've basically ever seen anyone run, but people hate him.
Yeah.
Like, he's a terrible person. And anyone who has an opportunity to stick a knife in this guy is going to, because he is a tremendous asshole. Like, this is not breaking news. Everyone knows this about him. And so you hear the way this donor talks about him. He's like, yeah, I didn't want to get punished for not contributing to his campaign. I wanted to be able to, make whatever corrupt business deals and do my transactional politics thing. That's what my $250K investment here was. It's not because I like the guy. So that's the other piece, is because he's such an asshole, when people have the opportunity to stick the knife in, some of them are going to do it.
Absolutely. It's also just such a massive referendum here on the Democratic establishment. CNN's Harry Epton did a good job of breaking some of this down. Let's play A6, please, just to explain it.
This was a political earthquake that should have the Democratic establishment running scared. What are we talking about here? Well, New York City primary upsets like Mamdani's. This is truly one for the record books. There are really only two that I could think of that are anything like this. And that was back in '89 for mayor when David Dinkins won over three-term mayor Ed Koch. Koch was running for a fourth term. The voters said, there was big turnout then, just like there was big turnout last night. And of course, more recently, if you want to take a look at a national picture, think back to 2018, New York's 14th Democratic primary going for Congress, when AOC beat House Dem Caucus Chair Joe Crowley. This, to me, is very much like that, energizing young voters, energizing voters on the left, and providing what truly was a historic night. You think about Democratic establishment, you think about Democratic Party leaders, pretty much all of them were behind Andrew Cuomo, but the bottom line is the Democratic base is fed up, done with the Democratic establishment. This is true in New York, it's true nationally. Democrats who say their party leaders should be replaced. Look at this. This is a recent poll from Reuters Ipsos. 62% of Democrats nationally say their party leaders should be replaced. Look, Democrats who identify as liberal nationally, in 1994 is 25%. You go to 2004, 33%. 2014, 43%. Now the majority of Democrats nationally identify as liberal.
So
take it to the bank. I think he's obviously correct. I mean, we've been talking about Democratic Tea Party, like this is what it is. This is the Eric Cantor loss in 2014. People being like, oh shit. Eric Cantor famously spent more at the Capitol Grill, which is a steakhouse here in Washington, on steaks than his opponent Dave Brat spent on the entire campaign. very similar,
He wasn't even in the district.
He wasn't even there. He was here.
Night that he lost to
exactly.
Dave Brad. I mean,
this is all old Washington lore, but it's important because you can just see that these stories are as old as time. And look, I mean, we haven't even really talked about. We talked a lot about the Zohran campaign. He ran a very effective campaign.
Oh yeah.
It was preposterous to make this thing whole about Israel. In fact, that's probably my best takeaway from this is AIPAC taking the biggest L of all time, doing second best amongst Jewish voters, but more importantly, that the psyops don't work anymore. A lot of people are also waking up to it. We can talk a little bit here about the establishment reaction, but there's even a split now, like on the right, of people who are like, oh, he's Muslim, and others, even Matt Gaetz, tweeting out Zohran's video about make halal $8 again, and people are like, I wonder why this won. You know, it's again, you know, if you've never lived in New York, if you've never been to New York City, like the cost of living and inflation of literally everything is insane. Like it's insane. Even, I don't even know, in the last 10 years, every time I go back, I'm like, what? What now? I don't drink anymore. I was at a bar recently and they were like, oh, $21. I heard somebody ordered a $22 cocktail. And I was like, oh, what is that? It must be like some fancy mart. They're like, dude, this is like well vodka. I was like, what? I was like, what has happened here?
Yeah.
But that's reality. That's life, from food to halal. And just talking about that is very important. So if we want, we can move on to that and talk about some of the reactions.
Well, just two quick things. So first of all the questions about Israel actually allowed Zohran to position himself as the America First or New York First candidate, where everyone else, oh, I'm going to Israel, go to Ukraine, whatever. Zohran, will you pledge to go to Israel? And he's like, I'm going to be here in New York delivering for New Yorkers. Oh, lo and behold, that's actually a pretty compelling message when, you know, they're trying to pin you down as some anti-Semite. And, you know, he also had a fantastic answer to, does Israel have a right to exist as a Jewish state? And he says, as a state with equal rights. What, you're against equal rights? That sounds to me like you're the one who needs to be explaining your worldview if that's where you are. So he handled all of that beautifully, and I think it actually turned into an asset for him, which in, you know, the city of New York, the highest Jewish population in the entire country, you know, incredibly significant vote, and he did quite well among Jewish voters. I haven't seen the official numbers of whether he won Jewish voters or Cuomo won Jewish voters, but he did very well among Jewish voters. So forget about your caricaturish idea that every Jewish person out there is hardcore committed to Netanyahu's genocide. I mean, it's preposterous. That's actually racist and anti-Semitic. So that's number one. Number two, the thing that I said on election night, and of course it remains to be seen, is this could actually be the moment that a lot of us thought the AOC moment was. And the reason for it is because of those numbers that Harry Enton put up, where the Democratic base no longer is in league and in love with the Democratic establishment. In fact, they are disgusted with them. And so that is what has changed the possibilities and created this particular landscape. So we'll see how all this plays out, but I guarantee you there are going to be more primary challenges. People are going to see this. They're going to be inspired. 2028 is going to be very interesting, you know, because you no longer have the Democratic base just willing to go wherever the elite Democratic establishment tells them to go. That represents an extraordinary break of a sort that we have not seen in the Democratic Party in my lifetime. So that's number one. Number two, we can go ahead and just roll through these, Eric. We've got, you know, Bill Clinton and Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries weighing in. Hakeem Jeffries and Schumer say congratulations effectively, and they're going to meet with him. But they still haven't said they're endorsing him for the fall. This is your Democratic nominee. In the city that, you know, Schumer's obviously statewide, but Hakeem Jeffries, you know, represents a district inside of New York City. And you can't even say, like, good luck in the fall, we're behind you. This is your Democratic nominee. So to me, that's pathetic. But the fact that they even put out anything that was positive, I guess, is noteworthy. And then here's Bill Clinton. This was the one I found most noteworthy because he actually says, I'm wishing you success in November. And as I said before, he had previously been behind Cuomo. So Clinton seems to be saying, all right, I'm with you now for the fall, for whatever that's worth. I mean, as a sort of leader in the Democratic Party. Jerry Nadler, also very significant in terms of the New York congressional delegation. Jerry Nadler also happens to be Jewish, so this is important too. And he says that Zohran's victory is a seismic election that I can only compare to Barack Obama's in 2008. He also concludes by saying, I've spoken to him today about his commitment to fighting anti-Semitism. We will work with all New Yorkers to fight against all bigotry and hate. So having the direct support of Jerry Nadler, who's considered the dean of the New York congressional delegation, also significant. So just quickly before we move on to the CNBC meltdown and the Republican meltdown and all of that sort of stuff, which will be fun to get into, what's going to happen now is they'll wrap up the ranked choice voting allocation. Zohran's going to win. He'll win by a wider margin than the numbers even show right now. And then it's on to the general election. Cuomo, apparently, according to those sources, if they're to believe, is going to drop. Eric Adams, however, is still in, and then you have Curtis Sliwa, who's the sort of kooky Republican nominee, is also in. So these people, that we're going to talk about, Bill Ackman and these sorts, who are desperate for anybody but Zohran, are probably going to have to rally around Eric Adams, who is this hilarious idiot and cartoonishly corrupt, by the way. And you remember he appeared to have made some corrupt deal with the Trump administration to have his charges against him dropped. But that's kind of their last best hope. And Eric Adams is polling pathetically in the city of New York because he was a terrible mayor and, as I just mentioned, cartoonishly corrupt. I mean, the number of his aides who had to resign or were indicted over, various scandals is, I lost count at some point. So he's not exactly the, the strongest person that you would like to see if you're trying to stop Zohran, and especially with the amount of momentum that he has at this time. So listen, they're going to throw everything they can at him between now and the fall. I have no idea what sort of dirty tricks they're going to pull, but I do think he's in a fairly strong position here, especially with Cuomo now stepping aside, because Cuomo, in spite of also being scandal-ridden and obviously people not having a particularly favorable impression of him, Cuomo is still a big name in New York. Cuomo it's still a dynasty. He, had all this establishment backing behind him. And so to have him out, I think Eric Adams is an even weaker, there's no doubt about it. Eric Adams is an even weaker candidate than Andrew Cuomo was at this point.
Yeah, that's right. So let's get to the establishment freak out. It's been hilarious to watch. CNBC, first of all, giving us some of the best, talking about how the rich are going to get shot in the streets of New York. Let's take a listen.
Have you seen what Batman is up against in Gotham and what the guy running for mayor is up against? That's what it reminds me of. They're taking Wall Streeters and make him walk out onto the ice in the East River as and hope, and then they fall through.
Yep.
I mean, there is a class warfare that's going.
So what's happened here, I think, is
the rich type.
It is not the closing of a steakhouse that David Zaslav likes to, and you like to go to. Well, you and I have had dinner there a few times.
Yes. And you and I are going to recreate that place.
The rent's too high. You know what? The new mayor, potentially, of New York is going to freeze the rents, and everybody eats for free, so they don't have to worry.
Really?
Yeah.
But how about the rich?
No.
Do they get shot?
No, yes. They get taken away.
Are we kulaks?
Yes, they get taken
away.
Lenin
We
have to go.
In 23?
We have to leave now. But everybody else, there he is. Mom, Donnie.
Maybe he's more modern
winning
than we
the
think.
Democratic primary for mayor and potentially the successor of Eric Adams. That said, there's still a general election to come here in New York. By the way, of course, we're here, we talk about it, but we are talking about a $2 trillion economy. It's not nothing.
It is a,
he wants to get the rents down. One good way to do it is to stop all business and drive everybody out. That'll bring the rents down.
That's a very good point. Right? Go to Jersey.
Which is pretty funny. I mean,
amazing.
Look, this gets to, again, some of my right-wing annoyance of it, as if New York is functioning fine. And I talked about this last time about all these billionaire people who are going to leave. The city has become a playground for the rich. Anybody who has visited Manhattan in particular can tell you this. It's not a good way to live and sustain a multi-million population. Part of the reason why people are turning against it, as I just referenced, let's think about this. If you grew up like I did in the 90s and someone was going to tell you, you're going to make 150 grand a year, be like, man, I'm going to be a baller. Show up in New York, it's like, good luck, buddy. You're going to be waiting at number 19 in the Resi queue, trying to get into the 50th best restaurant in New York. And look, I know this sounds preposterous, but a lot of people who live there, they live for this stuff. And it creates like a class anxiety kind of. So what you really see is that basically unless you make less than $250,000, I don't think you're living a very easy life in the city of New York. And that's part of the issue, is that a lot of it is basically like rolled up to the very top. I also think a huge problem with America's cities is that they have become playgrounds, not just for the American rich, but for the global rich. Again, same thing. If you're walking around Soho or any of these other people, half the people are not even from here. They're like rich people from Russia, Senegal, wherever. The entire world's population converges on Manhattan to basically buy shit and to stay at fancy hotels. And so
and to money launder, by the way.
And to money launder, yeah, exactly. It just becomes this thing on top of everything where, you know, the guy who wants to eat halal and just like live and go to work is just basically priced out of everything slowly and being pushed further out. And then, of course, you have people who have lived in the city for generations where the same thing is happening. So it's really an economic story, and it's one that Bloomberg really doubled down on. I mean, before that, it was not thought of as explicitly the playground for the rich of the entire global elite. There were pockets of that, but I don't think that was the actual identity and story of the city. But that's what it's become. So it's not a surprise to me that you have a rise up against it. I mean, there's a Peter Thiel email which has been going around, and it's really funny, and it's like, hey guys, like if you have he's like, millennials turn towards socialism. He's like, I'm opposed to socialism, but when you live in a society with high levels of student debt and housing unaffordability, it will not be shocking that they will have less stake in the system and choose something new. There you go. It's not complicated to me, literally at all.
I think we also have to just like level set about the radicalism of the policies that he's proposing. I mean, you've got these CNBC guys. It reminds me so much of Chris Matthews talking about how they're going to like take him in Central Park and shoot him if Bernie Sanders gets elected. Very, you know, same vibe. We're talking about free buses. We're talking about 5 government-run grocery stores. I mean, this is not like wild stuff. In fact, the bus thing polls at like 70 or 80% in the city of New York. That's what they consider to be so radical, and that they're completely panicking over. So, you know, I think it's important too to keep in mind that if you floated these policies in many cities worldwide, this would be like just very normal small ball kind of stuff. When we talk about freeze the rent, this is just on apartments that are already rent stabilized. This is a policy that's put in place in the past, for example, under Bill de Blasio. So it's really nothing that crazy. Donald Trump has now weighed in, not his finest post, I have to say. And, you know, we all respect and admire his posting abilities, but this was not his best work. Let's put this up on the screen from Trump. He says, "It's finally happened. The Democrats have crossed the line. Zohran Mamdani, a 100% communist lunatic, has just won the Dem primaries on his way to becoming mayor. We've had radical lefties before, but this is getting a little ridiculous. He looks terrible. His voice is grating. He's not very smart. He's got AOC +3, that's what he calls a squad. Dummies all backing him, and even our great Palestinian senator, crying Chuck Schumer, is groveling over him. Yes, this is a big moment in the history of our country. I mean, to me, not only not his best work, obviously the consensus is that Zohran does not, in fact, look terrible. But to me, it just oozes with envy. Like, I think for Trump to see this guy who's capturing all this attention in the city that Trump, you know, loves and made his name in, and where he always wanted to be accepted by everyone and beloved by everyone. That's what I take out of this.
Yeah, I thought it was more like a Fox News boomer reaction. They're obsessed with Zohran over there.
Not even a good nickname, though. Come on.
I was going to say, it's not a good nickname. It's just like objectively untrue. In fact, something I like about Zohran is that he does wear a suit, and he is relatively clean cut. And, you know, his entire campaign basically conducted either in shirt sleeves and a tie and or a suit everywhere that he goes. Let that be a lesson, dirtbag Democrats who look like shit all the time. Shout out to John Fetterman. The most successful one now today is who? Is Zohran Mamdani. So you should take that away. I will say, I do think that the reaction on the right is very interesting because there's a low IQ and a high IQ version. So we're going to show you some of the lower IQ stuff. Let's put B3, please, up on the screen so people can take a look. We've got Marjorie Taylor Greene tweeting out a photo of the Statue of Liberty in a burqa, or actually, no, what's the word? It's not a burqa. Niqab, I think that's what it technically is. Let's go to the next one. one. So just continue to show people. We've got Laura Loomer. There will be another 9/11 in New York City. Zohran Mamdani will be to blame. What else have we got here? Do we have anything else? You did it. You finally did it, you maniacs. You blew it up. A photo from the movie showing the Statue of Liberty there crushed on the beach. Let's continue, shall we? Shall we continue? Bill Ackman says, I have a great idea on New York City and I will share it again soon. His idea, by the way, is a write-in campaign. Genius, Bill. You know, Bill.
Oh, is that what they're doing?
That's what he said. So, hey, Bill, here's my idea. Spend as much of your fortune as humanly possible. We could not wish you more success.
Who are they writing in, though?
He hasn't even picked the person. That's the best part. He just says he's going to fund a writing campaign. Let's continue. There's one more here that we've got for people. Yeah, as he says, we're looking into legal issues concerning potential for another candidate. That was his little idea. But, you know, the thing is about it, and I guess, you know, this is the curse of like having knowledge, is like, guys, Zohran Mamdani is a Shia Indian Muslim. I found out his mother directed Kama Sutra. So I would venture to say that the majority of the Hindu population in the United States is about 10 times more conservative than Zohran Mamdani, Shia Muslim whose mom directed Kama Sutra, just so we're all clear.
Yeah,
in terms of
zero
what's going
indication
on
that he's
there.
like particularly religious in any way.
He seems like a shitlib to me, to be honest, in terms of his own personal politics. Whatever, fine with me. But my point is that there's like this, the way that they're talking about this seems like it's 2002 all over again. But I mean, look, I understand, I guess it works, you know, if you live in Alabama or whatever, but I think what really the takeaway should be is about the effective combatants of the attacks that have been launched. And ultimately, the stuff about socialism and AIPAC just fell flat. I mean, I get it. It probably feels really nice if you live in Pennsylvania, rural steel town, and you don't know anything about New York, and you're watching Fox News every day. But for the people who actually live there, like, this stuff just completely fell flat. And I think that should be a real takeaway. In fact, I mean, again, the smarter kind of right-wing critiques that I have seen about Zohran, I mean, mostly trace back to like his previous iteration as an identitarian leftist. Now, I would say that actually shows some of his political strength. He probably ran one of the most post-woke campaigns in modern left history. I would say, like, you know, I have not seen a lot of identitarianism from him. A lot of his 2020 tweets, I get it, it was cringe, but the man mostly talked about affordability, mostly was like focusing in on issues that were important to like the Democratic base, like capital D, and then also driving people out and hammering home the message of we want to make this a city that is easier to live in. Yeah. That's a good campaign. I mean, I'm sorry, that just is, that is the takeaway from me. And so, yeah, to watch like the way that they're trying to make him into a lightning rod, and I think this will be interesting for Zohran because he really, guys like him, like with AOC, you know, you get elected on a great promise, but now he's on the phone with Chuck Schumer. He's on the phone with Kathy Hochul. And listen, no matter what, New York is one of the richest cities on the planet. Like, you're going to be dining with billionaires and having all these people in your offices, and people are going to be lighting your phone up, and you're going to be part of the Democratic establishment now, even if you are technically oppositional. And you have a choice, right? And so that actually will be his biggest test, is not just governance, but in how he handles himself now as the official, like, Democratic nominee. And how that works has a lightning rod for what he'll turn himself into and what issues he chooses to fight on. That'll be the most interesting for me to watch, because he could go the AOC route. He
demonstrated a lot of pragmatism and coalition building in his campaign. I mean, the Brad Lander cross endorsement was genuinely huge. Brad Lander is the highest Jewish elected official in the city of New York, so having him vouch for Zohran and them cross endorsing, like, rank him first and me second, massively impactful. And Lander, Ryan described him as like the Elizabeth Warren of New York City. So you can imagine an alternative universe where Warren, instead of like accusing Bernie of being secretly sexist, where they're sort of in a coalition together. Now, ranked choice voting encourages those sorts of partnerships. But not only did he have that cross endorsement, he also had Michael Blake cross endorsement as well. And he reached out to the abundance people, went on with Derek Thompson, went on with Tim Miller, who is, more of a centrist-y kind of a Dem. We had him here on the show when Saagar was out, and really won them over as well. So he has demonstrated the ability both to, obviously he stayed rock solid in his commitment to Palestine, rock solid in terms of his core policy proposals that he wanted to focus on, but was also able to be pragmatic and reach out. Just to go back to the Republican critique, first of all, I mean, so many of these are just brazenly Islamophobic and racist. That's number one. Number two, the one that's really driving me completely insane is Stephen Miller and Charlie Kirk and others, but those are the two that I've seen prominently, are claiming that the reason Zohran won is because of so many immigrants in New York. Guys, if only white people had voted, Zohran would have won by more. So at least be accurate. I mean, the truth of the matter is, it really is a coalition between he won white people and Asians by the most, but some of the numbers I saw also had him winning Hispanics and then closing the gap with what the polling was showing with regard to black voters and winning overwhelmingly among young black voters. I mean, it really was a multiracial, cross-ethnic coalition of both native-born and immigrants into the city. And so if you're grappling with that, you're just lying. You're not depicting reality whatsoever. And so, with Stephen Miller, he's got his white nationalist project, and so he's using this as propaganda for his campaign. I have a feeling that he probably knows better. But if that's actually the lesson you're learning from this, you're not taking away the reality of what actually happened here, which to Saagar's point, Zohran's position was, this city has been run for billionaires, and I'm not going to run it for billionaires. I'm going to try to run it for your average New Yorker who is really struggling to be able to stay in the city and survive. And it should be no surprise to anyone that that is a message that really resonated across the city. I mean, he even won places in Staten Island. He was winning Brighton Beach. I mean, places that people did not expect him to do well. He was able to succeed. So in any case, a lot of the reaction has been unhinged. But you're right, Saagar, that some people on the right, Matt Gaetz was the most noteworthy one to me, actually engaged with the substance of what he was saying and sought to understand what the actual appeal was, not this insane racist fear-mongering that others were engaged in.
I mean, I think Zohran's biggest difficulty is going to be running headlong into the reality of New York. I've talked about it here on financing. It's good luck, man. I mean, your literal tax base relies on 15 people who live in the city. That's a huge problem. If, again, the entrenched interest and the permitting and all this stuff. I get that it's really bad, but what, you think you're the first guy to ever notice that the taxi cab union has too much power or that the permitting stuff for halal, it's a Byzantine system. Free buses, right? It's yeah, we'll see. Last I checked, what is it? MTA is half funded by Albany. There's always these huge fights between the governor and the actual mayor. I mean, this is a decades long thing. And I'm sorry I'm getting too in the weeds, but that's actually what I think would be the failure of a mayoral campaign by him, is to come in with these promises, free baskets or whatever. And listen, I mean, these things are also, you can overpromise and then dramatically underdeliver. Remember, didn't New York pass a right to housing or something like that?
They have a right to
housing or shelter. It's and that turned out to be a fucking mess whenever the migrant crisis broke out. It basically nearly bankrupted the city and turned a huge portion of working class New Yorkers against immigration. And so you can see how these things can actually really not work out in the way that you want it to, or can be overstretched. And, this is the reality. You're not the president of the United States. You're the mayor of New York. You got city council that you have, and then you have the governor on top. So you're both a figurehead with some power, but not a whole lot of power. And then same on, policing. Again, his old tweets on defund the police, I know he has recanted some of that stuff, but all it's going to take is a moderate increase in crime, and oh man, they will hang you out to dry in a second. So I see I see the treachery for his path, even if he does get elected, to be much more in the nitty gritty of the reality of how it all has to work.
He has to govern effectively.
Yeah, and I think it's just really hard in that city. I just don't. I mean, the way that it works. I mean, you haven't really, the political system in New York has just not worked for decades at this point.
There's two different potentials. You've got Brandon Johnson in Chicago, who has an extremely low approval rating, has governed very poorly, has been unable to deliver on some of the significant promises he made in his campaign. And then there's Michelle Wu in Boston, who similarly, elected quite young and has been quite successful and has been able to govern quite effectively, and also comes out of the left of the party and is really popular in the city. I lived in New York City during the Bill de Blasio time, and so Saagar, your point about like the entrance that he'll be up against are extraordinary.
Insane.
Now, luckily for Zohran, if he does, win in the fall, he's not going to have Andrew Cuomo as governor. Kathy Hochul is moderate, but Andrew Cuomo was actively in league with the Republicans. He and de Blasio despised each other openly, open warfare, and he did everything he could to try to block Bill de Blasio's core campaign promise of free pre-K. Now, de Blasio, to his credit, was able to actually get that through, and it's been phenomenally successful and really important program in New York City. One of the few ways that New York City has really been able to expand services in a way that's, been quite impactful for residents of the city, for ordinary, working class residents of the city. But de Blasio, who I think, much less effective communicator than Zohran, doesn't have some of the star power of Zohran, but his mayoralty was really dragged down by a lot of those entrenched, the real estate developers and the battles with Cuomo and all those sorts of things. So there is no doubt that even Zohran gets in the fall, he's going to have, a lot that he's going to have to cope with. Another thing people are pointing to is Brad Lander is currently the city comptroller and, has, I think, is likely to be or potentially to be involved in Zohran's administration. And he is respected sort of broadly as being highly competent, certainly understands the ins and outs of how the city works. So assembling people like that on his team who do have that experience and that know-how are also going to be really critical. Let's talk about a little bit of the unhinged Dem reaction, because while we showed you some Democrats at least being willing to play ball, Bill Clinton actually saying, okay, good luck in November. I've seen a bunch of the local, county Democratic parties getting behind Zohran as well. There have been others. Let's go ahead and put B5 up on the screen and we can go through some of these. So you've got Dean Phillips saying Democrats wishing to lose the 26 midterms should promote a 33-year-old socialist devoid of executive experience for mayor of America's largest city and impeach a president who ended a tyrannical regime's nuclear threat while achieving a ceasefire days later. So that is his view. Let's put the next one up on this. Brianna Wu, of course, weighing in here. It's an excellent piece. How can someone lead America's most important city if they want to burn down the democracy that makes our way of life in America possible? Like, what are you even talking about here? This is all over Zohran's defense of the phrase globalize the intifada, which became, big fodder for the campaign, but in effect,
Again,
attack.
Who gives a shit? This stuff drives me crazy.
I know. Seriously.
Again, I live here in this city. I don't know Mayor Bowser's view of globalize the intifada, nor do I care.
Yes,
right?
Correct.
Stop the bums from nodding out and shooting up in the middle of the street and knocking on my window. That's it. That's all I actually care about. It's like, it's one of those things where, we get lost in the sauce, where I'm just so happy that this failed at the ballot box.
Yes.
I truly am. And that people were like, yeah, this is bullshit.
Yeah.
Oh, God.
I think we might have a least Stefanik reaction here we can go to next, where she's apparently already fundraising off of Mamdani was the next one. And then I think we had one last one that we could go to as well of, this is no surprise, reverberation from Mamdani winning. Ours now have a real-life socialist to run against. Y'all were warned this would happen. This was in response to Stefanik fundraising off him. And then put the next one up on the screen. Andrew Cuomo should literally be sentenced to effing death for running the worst campaign in modern history and letting a communist win. Literal death penalty. I am serious. So now who wants to eat the rich? Now who's doing the executions in Central Park? I guess it's the centrist.
For letting Zohran win, I would say maybe for letting people die in a nursing home.
How about that?
That's just me.
Maybe that was a slightly more important thing for you to be mad at Andrew Cuomo for, is the fact that he, put elderly people with COVID back in nursing homes where they infected other people and led to an increase in the death rate, and then led a cover-up of it and lied about it to Congress.
To your brother,
and to Congress. And yeah, we're hanging out with your brother and joking about your
look, it's been years since we litigated this, but of course.
Yeah, we will never forget.
Broadly, look, I think Zohran was a very effective candidate. I think he did well. It's obviously a shock to the Democratic establishment. They would do well to listen. For him personally, really, it's going to be a great battle test. I think AOC dramatically failed that test and basically became like a woke stooge and was, a hilarity. Also let down a lot of the progressive movement. And now she's trying to slowly come back after Trump won the election, but I'm not sure she'll ever regain that type of credibility. If he continues in this like post-woke campaign and tries to deliver, he has a shot, but I think he's up against absolutely insane odds, just considering the way that system works. I'd read a little bit about LaGuardia and how effective he was.
Yeah.
But it just seems to me that those institutions are so decayed, and especially because at that time period, it was just less captured by money. I mean,
he had to go up against the Tammany Hall entrenched, Democratic political establishment. That's one of the parallels that people have drawn.
It just seems genuinely insurmountable. Like it's such an unlivable place in a way, like affordability wise, and it's so captured by these titans. You know those. What's that? It starts with a V, like the Vornado real estate. They own like all of Times Square, and they can just shut you down. It's effectively like a private government of all of these landlords and all these other people who, if they come and pool together, they can leverage their resources to basically buckle you. And not to mention, they still own, City Hall, and then they always have Albany in their back pocket. It's such an insane state, and I would never want that job. I truly would not.
To be honest with you, this is making me miss New York City so much.
Really?
I love New York City. Yeah,
See, I'm not.
I miss living there. I mean, it's a difficult place to live in a lot of ways, but it's also there's just such vibrancy. Truly like the melting pot, all of the different ethnicities and all the different neighborhoods and character. Like you could explore that city for your whole life and still be surprised by the things that you find. So I don't know, Zohran has rekindled my sort of love affair with that city. But you're not wrong about the odds that he's up against. I will say he ran a very effective campaign, demonstrated a lot of sort of like managerial competence, didn't have any like weird woke left-wing meltdowns within the campaign staff, was highly competent. They executed flawlessly.
Yeah, they did very well.
And he's got a lot of important allies who do have experience in the city. So, I don't think the residents of New York are looking for him to be able to effectuate the socialist revolution and have, make their lives like, I think they understand he's not going to have a magic wand, is what I'm trying to say. So it's going to be crucial that he deliver on some of these key promises that people can notice, that they can sink their teeth into, that make them feel like, okay, he's at least trying and fighting to do the things that he said that he was going to do, and critically that he is, an effective, competent manager. The trash is getting picked up, the snow is getting removed, all those sorts of things.
It's like crime, services, and then make sure that you at least can tangibly show people on cost, because that's what screws every sometimes they'll tangibly deliver on services, but then the crime goes up. And it's like, again, if you look at all of the history, it's so difficult, just because again, you don't really have like total power over it, and there's so many intersecting interest groups. But it'll be interesting. It'll definitely be interesting to watch.
Oh yeah.
All right, let's get to Scott Horton. He's standing by. Joining us now is Scott Horton. He is the director of the Libertarian Institute and the author of Provoked, and great friend of the show. It's good to see you, man. Thanks for coming back.
Thank you both very much for having me this morning.
Absolutely. We got a lot of Iran stuff to get to with you, Scott. First and foremost is a new statement from the Ayatollah Khomeini. Let's go ahead and put it up there on the screen. He's spoken out for the very first time. There was some speculation as to whether he'd been disappeared basically this entire time. Nobody really knows where he is. Striking a defiant tone there, basically declaring victory over the U.S. regime in his statement. So it is interesting, at least for what some of the posturing is. We also have posturing from the Iranians with this idea that their nuclear program has not actually been all that severely degraded. This is now a massive fight here in Washington. As you and I are speaking right now, the Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth is berating the media for reporting the previous intelligence estimate. And we also have the Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, coming out backing up Donald Trump. We can put that up there on the screen. It says, new intelligence confirms that the POTUS has stated numerous times Iran's nuclear facilities have been destroyed. If they choose to rebuild, they would have to rebuild all facilities entirely, which would take years to do so. She then goes after the propaganda media. So first, your reaction to that, and I understand you also wanted to expand a little bit on some comments you've made previously here on the show.
Yeah, I really, I'm ultimately still right anyway in the end, but I oversimplified a point when I was talking about uranium versus plutonium nukes and Iran's various potential routes to the bomb. And you guys' comment section called me out immediately and correctly so. Okay. So the first thing was just a complete screw up where I just mixed up Fat Man and Little Boy. Little Boy was the Hiroshima bomb. Fat Man was the Nagasaki bomb, which wasn't, I did get this part right, was the plutonium implosion bomb. And that is almost universally the type of bomb that is miniaturized and married to missiles. What I overstated was I think I said that it was virtually impossible to make a uranium implosion bomb, which is not really right. That was oversimplified. The real point is because Iran has no plutonium route to the bomb, because never mind what's been bombed now, but they never had a reprocessing facility necessary to clean the impurities out of plutonium to use it for weapons fuel. So they didn't have that route to the bomb at all. And then their uranium route to the bomb, the presumption was that if they made a bomb, it would be a gun type nuke, because that would be the easiest and cheapest to make. That if they raced to a bomb, they could do that quickly. Whereas it is possible to make an implosion bomb out of uranium, but it's much more complicated and would require a lot more testing. And there have been a bunch of false accusations about them working on those implosion systems at Parchin, for example, which turned out to be a bunch of propaganda that was later debunked. But so my point still stands in that if they had broken out from the treaty and said, we're going to make nukes now, they could either race toward a gun type nuke, which is essentially undeliverable, or they could plod along and try to get an implosion type bomb and figure out how to make one and marry that to a missile. And I believe that must have been what the intelligence assessment had been referring to a couple of weeks ago, saying that it would take them up to 3 years to have that done if they were openly seeking one. So the point essentially still remained. It was just that I had screwed up, first of all, the names of the bombs Truman dropped on Japan, which is a stupid error. And then secondly, I had essentially just overstated the limitations of a uranium bomb, and that essentially they would be forced to make a gun type nuke and would not have an implosion option available, which is not correct. It would take a lot more effort for them to do so. And it would give America and Israel a lot more time to launch an aggressive war against them in order to prevent them from getting that far. So that point essentially still stands. And I believe I made that same screw up on Piers Morgan and on the Jimmy Dore show. So this counts, I hope, as corrections for those two. I actually tried to invite myself back onto both to correct the same error, because I really hate being wrong about anything. People in my position, our position, trying to oppose these wars, we can't afford to be wrong. And I certainly was not trying to oversimplified to deceive anyone or anything, but I essentially did so. So I want to make sure that we get that straight.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, we appreciate your commitment to that kind of precision. Scott, it's part of what gives you so much credibility here. So what do you make of the battle over the intelligence assessment of how badly damaged these nuclear facilities ultimately were? Yeah.
Well, you know what? Not in a real benefit of the doubt sense, but just my feeling is I think Trump is probably right that the damage was, what they were hoping to get. And part of that is just because I know of the precision, their ability that they've had for many years to be able to drop a missile right down a chimney, fly it in a window. It's been this way since Iraq War I. And for them to drop a dozen or more, 14, I guess it was, they said, a 30,000 pound shape charge. These charges are meant to blast straight down, and they're 30,000 pounds, and then they drop them over and over and over down the same few holes. I imagine they can get quite a bit of damage done down there. And now their question was whether they had destroyed, all the buried centrifuge facilities and so forth. I'm really not sure about that, obviously. But Seymour Hersh had a thing where his sources are telling him that they actually didn't think that they could reach all the centrifuge facilities down there. And that wasn't what they were trying to do. Instead, they decided that they would just essentially hit every entrance and every air shaft and every tunnel available, and to just seal the place off. Anybody down there be buried alive, and no one on the surface ever be able to get down there again. And the one option would be that they would be able to do, a major mine shaft type operation like they did this rescue mission that he refers to years ago, I think in Peru or South Africa or something, where these guys were buried very deep down for a very long time, and they did get down there. But then we could bomb them when they're in the middle of trying that would essentially be the threat, right? So that sounds at least credible to me, that they know what they're doing. We're talking about the U.S. Air Force. Can they put firepower on a target and collapse a tunnel? Sure they can. So, and then they did virtually, I believe, destroy everything of real value at Isfahan, which is where they had the conversion facilities where you take the uranium ore, turn it to yellow cake, and then refine that or convert that, as they call it, to uranium hexafluoride gas, which you need to enrich up to higher and higher percentages of U-235. Then you have to convert it back into metal again. And they apparently destroyed all of that. And then, by the way, so there's this guy, David Albright, has a group called ISIS, which he called it that before the Islamic State, guys. But he's kind of a very pro-Israel simp. You know, I don't really like him, but I do respect his technical expertise. And his group has put out a pretty thorough report from commercial satellite pictures that they got, where they run through Fordo, Isfahan, Natanz, and a couple others. Apparently, there's been severe damage done at Natanz as well. And I think Trump's crowing because the Air Force is telling him we did it. And and by the way, this is announced yesterday that they're going to have talks next week. And it seems like Trump's position is going to be, look, man, I destroyed virtually your entire program. No point in rebuilding it because I'll just bomb it again. So just don't. And then, as he put it yesterday, I don't even think we need a new nuclear deal. We're just going to go on. They're just going to not have a nuclear program anymore. And I'm not really sure about that. The Ayatollah obviously has a huge incentive to be defiant, as he was in that speech. There's probably a likelihood that it's true, as they bragged, that they already have another secret facility up and running.
Right.
Or at least they're working on getting it. And I've been warning all along. I'd be happy to be wrong about this. I don't care. But the anti-war forces in America have warned all along that the threat, of course, is that if we attack them, then they'll make a nuke. Whereas this whole time they had acquired essentially a latent deterrent instead of going as far as having an actual nuclear weapon. So flip a coin. I guess we'll see how it works out.
Right. So that's the thing, Scott. Everybody's trying to parse this language. And if you really do look at it precisely, like for example, we can put the next one up there. This is from the CIA director. The CIA director, John Ratcliffe, released a statement. CIA can confirm a body of credible intelligence indicates Iran's nuclear program has, quote, been severely damaged by the recent targeted strikes. This includes new intelligence, etc. But the word severely damaged is what really struck to me because I mean, look, I know that Trump and the politicians are rhetorically, but obliteration to me means basically non-existent, whereas severely damaged is more in the realm of, well, it's technically repairable, especially when you pile on top the secret facilities, like you said. I also do believe that there's a lot of intra-governmental leaking going on, because what's the incentive of somebody leaking saying that the strike wasn't all that credible? Well, we got to go back and we got to go to do it again, right? And so then there's a lot of politicization here of the intelligence as well. So parsing those two things, you still think, like you said, that that secret facility is technically a possibility, but it may not necessarily be months as that initial assessment said.
Yeah, man, there's so much that we just don't know yet. But and I think the most important variable in it all is the Ayatollah's reaction. Either we just made him mad, and now, and plus all the guys around him too, they're all just going to be demanding, further, nuclear development. We'll just build a new Isfahan. We'll just build a new Natanz. We'll just do whatever we have to do to keep going. Or is it the case that, hey, the United States of America called his bluff, and ultimately their latent nuclear deterrent wasn't enough to stop us, and their mid-range missile deterrent wasn't enough, and they didn't dare, right? They shot, and this is such an important point too. This is the madman Ayatollah who only wants to bring on the apocalypse. He's willing to lose his whole nation in a first strike against Israel. They've told us for 25 years here or something like that. But now he did the same thing that Trump did after he killed Soleimani. And previous to that, in the summer of 19, when they had their back and forth over Kataib al-Hezbollah in Iraq, which is a Shiite militia backed by Iran there, and back and forth between them and Americans. They shot down the drone, I believe it was in the summer of 19. And then it was after Soleimani in the beginning of 20, they bombed the empty corner of an American base in Iraqi Kurdistan, which did give guys some concussions and things. It wasn't completely harmless, but it was obviously meant to be essentially a symbolic response. The same thing that they did when the Israelis killed the Hamas leader in Tehran in a bombing. And then they also had struck the Iranian consulate in Syria and killed important Iranian officials there. They launched that missile salvo at Israel, but they announced it beforehand and said, essentially get all of your defenses ready. This is because the Ayatollah, I'm sure it'd be terrible to live there. But he is essentially cautious in foreign policy because, and I'm sorry if I'm repeating myself, but I've been saying this for a very long time. If you're the Ayatollah, what are you going to do with a problem like the USA? Right? America has an incredibly powerful Air Force, even with conventional weapons. We could obliterate Iran's cities and they couldn't do nothing to us. They couldn't sail a boat within 1,000 miles of our shores ever. Right? So what's he going to do? Just get into a brawl with Donald Trump and lose so badly when he could try to calm it down? And so what did he do? He launched an attack at an American base in Iraq and an American base, our most important base at Qatar, CENTCOM headquarters at Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar. And as Trump said in a tweet, thank you very much for the prior warning that you're going to launch this symbolic attack and let us, shoot it down and this kind of thing. So the Ayatollah there was telegraphing very obviously, I do not want to fight you. Please, let's call this off. So,
it's almost like
what he's going to do now, and he's an old man
actors.
too. He could drop dead tomorrow.
It's almost like they're rational actors and not the end time psychopaths that we've been sold on who are ready to nuke Kansas the moment that they have the opportunity, or Tel Aviv for that matter. Let's talk a little bit about the other nation state involved in this conflict. That would be Israel. Guys, if you could put C5 up on the screen, this is, the axis between the American neocons and also the Israelis. So you've got Mark Levin here praising Netanyahu for his new speech, saying Israelis have never been more united. The Arab world has never been more appreciative. Netanyahu is a truly remarkable leader, and this is with regards to a speech where Netanyahu says we must complete the campaign against the Iranian axis, defeat Hamas, bring about the release of all of our hostages, and he says in there as well, we have no intention of taking our foot off the gas. We must complete the campaign against the Iranian axis. At the same time, guys, if you could put C3B up on the screen. This was a truth from Trump, which I will spare you reading all of this way too long thing. But in essence here, he is praising Bibi Netanyahu lavishly and calling for the corruption charges which he's been facing inside of Israel, to be dropped. He says he's been going through this horror show with regard to these corruption charges since May of 2020. Unheard of. This is the first time a sitting Israeli prime minister has ever been on trial, and calls them politically motivated. So in any case, what do you make of how the Israelis are assessing this moment, and what do you think is going on here with this Trump truth in praise of Netanyahu?
Well, I think everything's coming up Likud, right? I mean, they have been, largely successful in the annihilation of the society of the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. The settlers are on the move, expanding in the West Bank. They've taken all the territory up to the Litani River in southern Lebanon and taken a major chunk out of Syria. They've completed, with the help of the Turks, the al-Qaeda revolution and takeover of Syria and the end of the Ba'athist regime there, which was led by Alawites who were close to the Shiites and close to Iran. They, through the pager attack and aerial attacks, they have severely crippled Hezbollah as well as killed their leader, Nasrallah. They got America to come in and help them to severely cripple, at the very least, Iran's nuclear program. We don't know exactly, as we've been talking about, how that's going to play out, what the consequences of that'll be. Mm-hmm. They still have the Houthis, and the Houthis are hard to kill. Barack Obama and Donald Trump already tried to kill them, and Joe Biden a little bit for about 8 years there, and didn't win anything. All they did was, war's the health of the state unless you lose, and in this case, they didn't lose. And so the people of Yemen are more united around their government now than probably ever before, under what the academics call the rally around the flag effect. I know a reporter that I interviewed years ago, or I interviewed him a ton of times, Nasser Arabi from Sana'a, said, "Oh, we're all Houthis now." Not that they are, but the same way Americans supported George W. Bush. Somebody attacks us, then it's us versus you, if that's how it is. And as he put it to me, he said, well, George Bush is from Texas, right? But when he's the president of the country, he's not just a Texan, he's the president of the country, and he's respected as such by the people of the whole country, not just the Texans, of course. So it's the same thing when the Shiites from the Sada province are in charge. you attack the country, you attack the country. And now there are splits, and in the South they have the STC and all that, but overall, the Houthis have proven to be a very difficult target to take out from the air. And who's going to send in ground troops there? And this goes back to our hypothetical about Iran, which I sort of trailed off instead of wrapping up, that if they decide to double down on their nuclear program, then we go back to what Netanyahu said the other day, which is, what would solve this problem permanently? Killing the Ayatollah and having a regime change there one way or the other, which they may even be able to accomplish by air if they have real intelligence. Trump threatened, I know exactly where you are. I could kill you right now if I wanted to, the other day, a week ago. And so by their logic, if they're right, if even the guys, Mark Dubowitz from the Foundation for Defense of Democracies was saying, well, now that Israel started this war, America better go in there with their big bunker busters efficient, or else now they're going to break out toward a nuke. Exactly. Well, they still might now try to break out toward a nuke, in which case the logic is that the problem isn't solved yet. We got to keep killing mullahs until the problem is solved, until we can parachute in a monarch, or we'll have Al-Qaeda in Iraq take over in Iran too, since they've done such a great job in Syria for us.
I mean, hey, listen, Donald Trump literally shaking the guy's hand It's unbelievable. Scott,
he has a very strong past. Trump said, look it up. He told Frontline, he's like, I killed American soldiers in Mosul and Ramadi. That's the strong past that Trump's referring to.
Right, but we got to take out the Ayatollah because American soldiers were.
And this goes the whole thing. Yeah. Israel's enemies are the Shiites. But it was not Hezbollah that knocked our towers down. I'm sorry I'm such a broken record on this, but this is all treason because the Likud hates Iran.
Right.
But America could have normalized relations with Iran back in the 1990s. Mm-hmm. Hell, Ronald Reagan was selling them missiles in the mid-1980s. After Beirut, within a couple of years, he's selling them missiles. Zbigniew Brzezinski and Alexander Haig wanted to normalize relations in 1993. The Ayatollah came begging George W. Bush to get along with the Golden Offer in 2002. So you guys hate the Taliban? You guys hate Saddam Hussein? You guys hate Al-Qaeda? Let's work together.
Yeah.
And the neoconservatives said no, because Israel hates the Shiites more. Scott, and somehow that matters more than who hit the Pentagon.
Let me ask you one last question here, which is the Iranians are, trying to claim and assert some sort of victory and project that they effectively were able to affect enough damage inside of Israel that Israel felt the need to accept this ceasefire, and there was reporting about Israel running low on interceptors. And I think the other way they're claiming victory is basically you all wanted to destroy us and collapse the government, and the government is still here, and our nation is still here. So what do you make of, their sort of celebration and their claiming of a victory in these circumstances? Well,
in the first case there may be some truth to that they still have missiles in reserve, and Israel's running out of Sparrows and Iron Domes and Patriots and whatever that they had to shoot them down with. There may be some truth to that. I'm sure there was some pressure on the Israelis on their side of it, because a lot more missiles did get through than they thought. As far as the second part, I think that's sort of propaganda, mm-hmm. Trying to portray a little bit of a position of strength there. Domestically trying to save a little bit of face there. But I think it was Donald Trump that said, we're calling a halt here short of regime change. I think if he had given Netanyahu permission to keep going, or had shared the intelligence, this is where we think the Ayatollah is, go ahead and get him, then they absolutely could go that far. Anybody could probably just picture, just from memory, B-52s over North Vietnam, just what they call carpet bombing, just pouring dumb bombs out of the belly of those gigantic heavy bomber planes that we have. And there's pictures, people have seen profile pictures of B-2s doing the same, but the B-52s especially, America could really devastate. It was credible when he ordered, Donald Trump, don't forget, ordered the evacuation of Tehran.
Yeah.
And the implication, was like, geez, I don't think he's going to nuke them, but what is he going to do? What is even the implication there? And it turned out the implication, which was the most minimal one, was just, he was going to encourage the Israelis to keep hitting government targets in that city. They weren't going for terror bombing of the neighborhoods. on the vast scale that they could. But boy, even that threat sure sounded like it and was going very far here. So I would expect for the population and the political establishment inside Iran to be more radicalized and more defiant than ever. It's only natural, really, unless the Ayatollah just slams his fist down, says, no, I'm in charge here. And I say, boy, we better be conciliatory now because of our position of weakness, which I think is doubtful, right? Like, but that's what it would take. Yeah. It would take him telling, shouting at everybody else to shut up. I'm the one deciding, and I've decided that we're going to have to play a little bit meek in the face of this madman or whatever. But I don't know how anyone could fairly expect that to be the result of this, quite frankly.
We'll see. Scott, thank you so much for joining us, man. We appreciate your analysis.
Great to see you, Scott.
Thank you both so much. Yeah, really appreciate you.
Let's turn now to the one big beautiful bill. That's the major tax legislation being pushed by Republicans through the House and the Senate. There's been some pretty big developments there, but really it's the political development of the future of Medicaid, which is the one that is just hanging like a noose around the Republicans' neck. You've got two sides, really. You've got President Trump and you've got Josh Hawley and a few other Republicans who are saying, we're not going to cut Medicaid. We're not going to touch it. And then you've got others like Senator Mitch McConnell who are like, yeah, people will get over it. And if you think I'm making it up, let's put this up there on the screen. This is leaked from a direct meeting of the Senate Republicans. Senator Tom Tillis warned GOP senators during a closed-door meeting that Senate reconciliation bill would prompt major electoral losses, because similar to Obamacare. Tillis aired concerns with Senate's Medicaid provider tax framework. The majority leader, John Thune, defended it, saying it's key component for their spending cuts. Separately, Mitch McConnell said, quote, failure isn't an option. I know a lot of us are hearing from people back home about Medicaid, but they'll get over it. They'll get over it. Okay, good luck. Yeah, I don't think so, actually. And, just to show that it's not just crazy people like Josh Hawley or whatever that are worried about this, let's put this up there on the screen from Politico. Even the speaker, Mike Johnson, who is not some, liberal, is saying that Medicaid backlash could be a serious problem for a lot of the House Republicans and their majority next year. A lot of this just comes down to the fact that because they're not willing to cut the Pentagon and because discretionary spending is just not that big, like in terms of DOGE or wherever, I think it's probably less than 7% of the federal budget. You've got to hit an entitlement program somewhere. You can't touch Medicare, can't touch Social Security, so they're going after at quote-unquote reforms within Medicaid. But no matter which way you slice it, it would lead to less services, and that's, of course, where the spending cuts are coming from. And that is one of the most tangible ways, which particularly lower middle class Americans and more interact with the federal government for spending. It would just be such a massive own goal, especially in the realm of war with Iran and a $1 trillion Pentagon budget, to show what the priorities are, not to mention the fact that it extends many of those tax cuts from the TCJA, which had lowered the taxes for the wealthiest income brackets. There's also the SALT provision, which continues to be battled out within there, but Medicaid is like the number one thing. And actually, outside of Iran, I think this one is breaking through. This is one of those where it's like the Social Security thing. It's a service that people use. By the way, my Social Security card for my daughter took forever to come. Thank you, Elon. Yeah, it's like a tangible thing. I was like, where is the damn card? I needed to sign up for health insurance. But just goes to show you, these are things people actually need to use, all segments of society. And so that really, especially combined with the tax cut, it's just a brutal headline for the Republicans. Brutal.
Even Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer can figure out how to message this one.
Yeah, that's right.
A giant tax cut. You are losing your health care so that rich people can get a tax cut. That's the promise of this bill. And that's why some Republicans are wise enough to realize this could be a political problem. I mean, I think a lot of them realize that. But remember, the vast majority of the Republican caucus are in incredibly safe seats. So they're not worried about it.
Right.
You have, the number of swing states has shrunk and shrunk and shrunk. So you have a comparatively small number. And then they're terrified of just getting crosswise from Trump because, they see what he's doing to Thomas Massie right now and the way he's aggressively going after it. We didn't even get a chance to cover this. He set up an entire PAC to spend money against Thomas Massie to try to defeat him because of his, defiance over a number of issues, but including the, illegal strikes on Iran, illegal war waged against Iran. So, they know what happens when you get crosswise with Trump. And so they're fearful, even the ones who are in districts that are potentially winnable by a Democrat.
Yeah, that's right. And so let's go to the next one, please. And just on the screen, just to underscore a lot of this, this is D3, and it shows all of the polling. So this is from Fox News, by the way, and that's why we picked it. So can you understand what's in the bill? 60% say yeah. That's actually a lot. I'm pretty shocked that people are paying attention that much. But here's the most devastating one. Your opinion, 60% say they oppose. 38% say that they favor. For your family, the big, beautiful bill will, quote, make no difference, 26%, 23% help, 49% say it will hurt. It's not exactly true, just because outside of Medicaid, it's mostly extending tax cuts that were already passed. That's why it's kind of funny seeing the Republican messaging. They're like, if we don't do this, it will be a massive tax hike. I'm like, well, no, it'll revert back to the original tax code of 2016. But what? Most people don't actually pay that much attention to taxes. It's really about services that broadly is one of the ones that we're watching. So, for example, let's put, guys, D4 up on the screen. This is about the process that has happened inside of the Senate, and that's broadly where these Medicaid stuff has come into play, because a lot of the spending cuts are coming from the program. President Trump actually spoke with a reporter today saying he was against that. But then on top of that, and I know this sounds like very in the weeds, but it really matters, is that just this morning, the Senate parliamentarian has, quote, struck a whole bunch of critical health provisions from the bill, including the provider tax framework. Effectively, what that means is it screws with many of the ways they were going to pay and fund their tax extension and their spending cuts. And so what that would mean is it would increase the deficit score. Now, if it increases the deficit score outside of the Senate bill, that will then move to the House, where already you had a lot of Freedom Caucus Republicans bucking at the fact that the deficit was going to increase as a result of this. So you got two kind of opposing forces at work. And most importantly is that President Trump has said he does not want Congress. We can put that D5, please, on the screen. President Trump has said nobody's leaving Washington until the mega tax bill is done. He wants it passed by July 4th. This makes that a hell of a lot more difficult, because they just lost a lot of their pay-fors. They're going to be in parliamentary hell for the next week now, basically. And what that means is that they're going to have to scramble and find some other stuff to do that's going to run up against the House Republicans and the Freedom Caucus. And of course, it just makes, it's not only is it more chaotic, but it's more likely they're going to have to cut even deeper from some other type of social program and find some other way just to pay for a tax cut, which people at home are all paying attention to.
A couple other provisions that the parliamentarian has said cannot be included in this reconciliation bill that are noteworthy. Number one, we had mentioned before and covered before the fact that in the House version, there was effectively a provision that is meant to make it difficult or impossible for federal courts to enforce contempt charges against the federal government. The parliamentarian has said you can't do that. The Senate had a slightly modified version. It would have required plaintiffs to post potentially enormous bonds when asking courts to issue preliminary injunctions or impose temporary restraining orders against the federal government. The House version had to do with contempt orders. In any case, she said none of this can go in this bill, so that is probably being stripped down. Another couple that are really noteworthy, there was a provision that would reduce the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, that's basically the anti-scam bureau, funding to zero. That also was deemed to not qualify for reconciliation. And there was another proposal that would put the Public Company Accounting Oversight Board, which is the U.S. audit watchdog, into the SEC. That, again, was deemed not eligible for the reconciliation process. So these are some of these provisions. The court one is actually quite significant, and the CFPB one also very significant. So the fact they won't make it into reconciliation matters a lot. But also, to Saagar's point, you know, as they go through all these things, there was also a piece they were trying to sell off all the U.S. Postal Service's new electric vehicle fleet and charging infrastructure, which I can't imagine they were going to make like that much money on it. But that was another one of their pay-fors.
I'll buy it.
That also got taken out of the bill. So I'm sorry, you won't be able to purchase one of the USPS electric
I'll take
trucks.
it for pennies on the dollar. That sounds pretty fun, actually, to roll around in an electric post office. I mean, one of the weirdest things is I actually love not even just electric vehicles, but resto mod stuff, like stuff that's electric, like a golf cart. You know what and things like that. They're just fun to drive. Like, let's be honest.
At this point, a checkered relationship with golf carts.
I don't blame you. I don't blame you. But I enjoy him. I enjoy seeing him around. Okay, let's move on to Bernie, shall we?
Yeah, so Bernie Sanders went back on with Joe Rogan. I sort of skimmed through the whole conversation, and there was a long stretch that was interesting, but kind of, went on for a long time about like AI and what do we do about this and how do people find meaning. So that was a lot of it. Also, Bernie just doing his normal Bernie thing, talking about healthcare and the millionaires, the billionaires was also a good part of it. But there are a couple pieces that I found pretty interesting. One of them where Bernie is talking about Congressman Massey and some of the attitude he's taken towards the Iran war in particular, and you get Joe's response to that. So let's go ahead and take a listen to that.
I mentioned there's a guy named, I don't even know his first name, Mr. Massey. Is that name ring a bell?
Thomas Massey.
Thomas from Kentucky.
Yeah.
And this guy, as I am, is opposed to this war in Iran. Just yesterday, Trump gave a long post about how they're going to primary this guy. And what bothers me is you would hope that there would be respect enough for members of Congress that you can vote your own conscience. You could, represent your constituency. Every district is different in America. But right now, anybody stands up and say, well, I disagree with President Trump. Bam, you are finished. We're going to primary you. We got all kinds of money. You're out of there. That happened to Massey yesterday.
So I thought that was pretty interesting, that coming up, and Trump's attempt to punish Thomas Massey, which we were just talking about. And Thomas Massey's been speaking out a lot about AIPAC, and I think it's been really important.
He's also raised about $1.5 million in the last week, so Massey's crushing it right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think that his speaking out on AIPAC in particular, coming from a Republican who has a lot of credibility, he's an ideological libertarian, but he has a lot of credibility with a pretty significant swath of the Republican Party. And for him to be talking about the influence of this lobby and the way that it works, I think has been really significant, broken through to people like Joe Rogan and others where, the left, we're always talking about money in politics. Bernie's always talking about money in politics. It really does land a lot when you have someone from the right who is making that kind of a critique.
Yeah.
There was another moment here that I thought was interesting that I wanted to get your reaction to, Saagar, where Joe is talking about how he sees the divisions within MAGA right now, again, about war in Iran. Let's go ahead and take a listen to that part.
I think the whole MAGA thing right now is very divided, particularly because one of the things that they voted for was no war. Well, now it seems like we're in a war, right? So and it's quick. We're 6 months in, and that's already popped off. And then people are very concerned with now what happens to our troops overseas that are in these bases, that are in vulnerable positions, and what happens with, there's supposedly documented terror cells that got in through the open border over the last 4 years. So what happens now in America? What happens on American soil?
Sure. No, I agree with those.
When a guy like Thomas Massey steps up and says something like that, he's going to have a lot more support as well.
The answer is yes. And my only point is he has a right.
Yes.
Somebody else says, hey, I think the war is a great idea. Fine, that's your view. You got to go back. But what bothers me is that if anybody stands up, the next day, we're going to primary. You're out of here, man. And that's the Republicans. Let me talk about the Democrats for a moment, okay? And I don't even know your views on this, so you may disagree with me. Israel was attacked by Hamas, and Hamas is a terrible terrorist organization. They killed 1,200 people, which in a small country like Israel is a lot of people. Terrible, terrible attack. It's a war crime. Israel had a right, in my view, to defend itself. But the Netanyahu government did not have a right to kill 52,000 people in Gaza, wound well over 100,000. And right now, as we speak, Joe, children are starving to death because of Israel's blockades.
Yeah.
Starving to death. And I brought forth 2 resolutions, which basically were very simple, and they said no more U.S. military aid to Israel under these conditions. One vote got 15 votes in the Senate, the other one got 16. Do you think that members of the Senate do not know what's going on in Gaza? The kids are starving to death. The innocent people are being shot down right and left. They know it. Why do you think I couldn't get more votes?
They wouldn't vote against Israel.
Right.
It's political suicide.
Now you're talking.
Right.
All right. So in the Republican side, you have moneyed interests saying you speak up against Trump, you're out of here. In the Democratic side, you speak up against the Netanyahu government, you're out of here as well. And they have been successful. You have super PACs like AIPAC spending a fortune. You stand, and they have already knocked off a number of members of Congress, good members of Congress, and they will do it again. So all I'm saying is you got a corrupt campaign finance system on both sides.
So what do you think of that exchange?
Well, that's what makes Bernie good at this, right? Is that he's talking both about those sides, and he also gets Joe to kind of agree with him. I mean, you know, it's funny. This is where the analysis just always, and I understand why people do this, but the MAGA base is an actual thing. It's not just like something you talk about. I'm talking about people who love Donald Trump and say that he is more important to them than the Republican Party. That is not really the podcast audience really at all. Most of those people are boomers, rural, working class voters who mostly just like don't vote for anything else and they just love Trump. Now, outside of that is more what I would say is the Maha base, and this would probably be a more accurate way of talking about it, who are a lot more podcast aligned and who are a lot more libertarian. Those are the people, I put Dave Smith in that category, maybe Candace Owens, probably Joe himself, who were attracted to Trump for more of those elements, Tulsi Gabbard as well. That, if anybody's, quote, been betrayed, I would say it's that segment of that audience. Now, I'm not going to sit here and claim that that's a meaningful 50 or 60% or whatever of the Republican electorate, but it is a new part. And it's also, look, when you win the popular vote, you do so with a coalition. You have MAGA they're never going to go anywhere. That's not the point. MAGA's not ever going to go anywhere. The boomer Republicans are going to vote Republican no matter what. The way you win the popular vote are with some really interesting coalitional groups, Maha people, and also some of these more anti-war voters. You know, we were going to do a segment before the Iran war ended, whatever, at least paused, at least for now, about polling. But, you know, these anti-war Muslims in Dearborn, it was not nothing that put him over the edge. That's how you win X amount of electoral votes. And so I think we need to be more accurate in terms of the type of voter who is out there. Again, I would never claim that this is a huge percentage, but it can be your margin of victory. And I think we should start thinking about it in those terms.
To me, the way I've been talking about it is the MAGA base versus independents. You know, there were independents who swung to Trump, and that's what gives him this victory and gives him the popular vote margin, et cetera. And I think they're the ones who are up for grabs. And, you know, independents overall, if you look at the polling, people who don't identify as Republicans, don't identify as Democrats, they are not happy about the strikes. You know, the numbers are significantly underwater. They're overwhelmingly underwater among Democrats. They are significantly underwater among independents. Among Republicans, they all basically support him. CBS did to your point about like parsing the MAGA base, CBS did a poll separating out all self-described Republicans from self-described MAGA Republicans. And among all Republicans, the strikes were supported 85-15, so still quite overwhelming. Among MAGA Republicans, actually, the support is even higher. 94% of the MAGA Republican base supported these strikes. So the accuracy in the language is something that's been bugging me too, because if you say the MAGA base is divided, like they're not. Yeah, the MAGA base is 94% in favor of these airstrikes. They shifted. Before Trump did it, there was a little bit more dissent, a little bit more concern. Once he did it, they were all on board. And that is what we've seen. You know, there is not a core ideology here. The core commitment is to Donald Trump. And what he does, what he says, defines where MAGA is going to be. And that is just reality that we've seen time and time and time and time again. This is not the first time that Donald Trump has claimed he was going to go in one direction and then ultimately gone in the other direction. And we've seen the MAGA base every single time find a way to justify it because Trump did it, ergo it must ultimately be good.
That's right.
Probably the most heated exchange over the course of the interview came towards the end, when Bernie seeks to bring up some of Trump's authoritarian tactics, and Joe starts to get a little, you know, it gets a little more contentious here, where Bernie is specifically talking about some of the lawsuits and the attacks on free speech by Trump, some of the lawsuits that he has waged against various media companies. Let's go ahead and take a listen. This went on for a little while, but let's go ahead and take a listen to a section of this.
And what I worry about Trump is, you're right. You know, I read, it is astounding back in the 1780s when these guys wrote the Constitution, how perceptive they were.
Amazing.
Yeah. I mean, they said,
their understanding of human desires and the power and all the corruption.
Exactly.
Pretty amazing.
And they wrote that having just fought a war and won a war against the most powerful despot on earth, the King of England, right?
Right.
And I think in the back of their minds was saying, all right, we just beat the King of England, absolute power. How do you create a new country which has checks and balances so that nobody ever has that power again? And I got to say, I mean, one of the things, and there was a lot of arguments about Trump, that worries me very, very much is this movement toward authoritarianism and going after media, suing media, taking away the authority that Congress has.
When you say suing media, are you talking about the CBS lawsuit?
Among other things.
Right, but don't you think there's a real issue with what they did?
No.
You don't think that there's a real issue in editing conversations to give someone an answer that's different than what they really answered?
Joe, I've been on 8 zillion shows, right? In my life.
Okay.
Now, should I sue you if you ask me some stupid question that I don't like, right? Or that you do something. Should I sue you?
Yeah, but that's not what he's getting.
Well, he has sued. He has sued ABC.
Mm-hmm.
He has sued Meta. He is suing the Des Moines Register because of a poll that came out during the campaign that he didn't like. All right. He is suing CBS for this Kamala Harris interview. So do I think how many? I cannot tell you the number of stories done about me that were not good stories,
right?
That were dishonest stories. That's what a free press is about. You don't like it, you got to live with it.
So, Bernie is sort of making the broader point about the authoritarian tactics, and Joe is. Joe's supposed to be a free speech guy, but then he's down with these lawsuits against
I think I get
CBS, et cetera.
The reason I understand is he's probably deeply fed up with a lot of these. In fact, I find this with a lot of rich guys who are like relatively well known as they get pissed about the media. And I actually understand. But the point is that
we get pissed about the media too.
I hate them as well, right? Like I've literally had lies written about me multiple times. And it's like, well, that's part. I think it's more useful to explain the principle. And I haven't listened fully to the interviews. I don't know if Bernie gets to this, but the point of the way that the standard is set currently is that you have to be able to prove as a public figure their willful knowledge that they knew what they were saying was a lie at the time. And then you have to be able to show a damage. Now, the reason why it's set that way is from a New York Times, New York Times versus Sullivan case at the Supreme Court back in the 1970s, because we actually used to live in a much more censorious press. And the way that current legal doctrine looks like is Britain. And in Britain, they actually have a much lower standard for the ability to sue over defamation and libel. And in my opinion, I don't think they have nearly an adversarial culture enough. You have much more of like the power veto of somebody coming in and saying, no, that's not going to happen. And the reason why I think that standard is important from a media person who works in this is it preserves the ability to report things that are off the cuff, on the fly, first draft of history. Of course, there are going to be errors as long as you have an editorial process in place and you can also demonstrate that what you're trying to do is not willfully lie about somebody, then it should be an extremely high standard to make sure that you can disseminate that level of information.
Yeah.
And if that didn't exist, you genuinely would have just a lot less of people. Okay, let's go to a great example. This Iran intelligence story, right? The Trump administration is saying that they're trying to libel these pilots. You can see that's bullshit. That's not what's happening.
Right.
They took facts and they reported it. They're not willfully trying to libel or defame the pilots. They're taking information and they're putting it out into the public. But people should know that prior to that Sullivan decision and really to the Pentagon Papers, that story would have seen the light of day. You and I would have no idea that was actually the case.
Well,
and I think we're better off knowing.
Let's take that one step further, because this gets to the next point, which is that what happened with ABC News and with CBS is because they didn't want to get crosswise with the Trump administration, they didn't go forward and fight.
That's the thing.
Those
they could have taken it to trial and they absolutely would have won.
They
I'm telling
decided,
you 100%
but they decided they would rather effectively pay a bribe to Trump so that their business deals could go through. And Bernie does get to this point. Their business deals can go through and they're not going to get messed with, et cetera. And so even though, when they're out there saying, the New York Times or whoever is libeling these pilots, even though that's obviously a bullshit and spurious claim, because of the track record of all of these media lawsuits, and the fact that these corporate entities are very willing to bend the knee and capitulate and pay the bribe rather than have their business messed with, it does it does act as an effective check on the press because they have that hanging over their head. We saw the way that 60 Minutes, the fallout over there and their desire, the leadership's desire there for them not to go too far in terms of their Trump criticism so that their larger business entity wouldn't get crosswise with them. And so that's the point that Bernie is trying to make. And, on the specifics of like the CBS News, I think was the one where there was an edit of Kamala Harris that made Kamala look better. I mean, you can criticize as we did.
Yes.
But also news outlets edit interviews all the time.
Right. Not
all
us, by the way. Not us, just so you have
Fox News, I'm not going to say we've never edited an interview.
I'm not sure it's ever happened.
I don't know if we have, but theoretically you could imagine, that question we don't have time, whatever.
Fair
but
enough.
Fox News edited that interview with Trump, where to make his Epstein answer look better. Like, should Kamala sue Fox News over distorting the election because they hid from the audience the fact that Trump gave a really poor answer on Jeffrey Epstein that actually raised a lot of questions? No, she should complain about it. Fine. But the idea you should sue them or any other news outlet that edits an interview a way that you don't find to be advantageous for you or you find to be advantageous for your opponent, that is ridiculous. I mean, it is completely absurd. But again, the broader piece here is part and parcel of this, series of authoritarian tactics that are used to force media organizations to trim their sails, to not critique as much, to be afraid of these lawsuits, to pay tribute to the king. Goes with the approach to universities, goes the approach to law firms, and, is sort of like part and parcel of this project. And that is really the important point to make here versus getting into the nitty gritty. I mean, the details, sure, they matter, but getting into the nitty gritty of the lawsuits isn't really the point. It's that bigger picture that is what really matters.
I don't disagree, but I also think that part of the problem, and this is actually, I think Trump is, what he does is he takes everything to the nth degree. But the truth is that government has always used its leverage over these massive corporations to influence media. And what we can see, for example, let's take CBS. CBS is owned by Paramount, right? And Paramount is now being sold to Skydance. Well, Sherry Redstone, who was the head of Paramount, who is, by the way, a massive pro-Zionist Jew, that's part of the reason she's interfering in CBS 60 Minutes, and also because she wants her merger to go through, which is like Paramount Studios in Hollywood. And thus is trying to placate Trump over here. This, right, by the way, is, again, this is not just Trump. This is a tale as old as time. The Bush administration did this on Iraq coverage back in the mid-2000s. We've seen significant pressure in the past. For example, I read Jack Welch's book, or a book about Jack Welch, and he would never sell CNBC because he was like, you don't understand. CNBC cost me X amount of money, but its value to General Electric as a company because of the ability to manipulate the stock market and to influence all policy discussion is immense. Bloomberg, same thing. Bloomberg Terminal owns Bloomberg News. So really, I think it's also a story of corporate consolidation and control over media. Because of course the government and presidents and that will use their leverage on those organizations. We've seen it threatened in the past. Nixon famously as well would threaten their businesses and their permits and all these other things that won't be able to go through. It's part of the reason why, with the internet and more independent models, you genuinely can get a little bit more freedom. But it's such a big story that it is important for people to understand that.
That's all accurate. I've never seen a president sue a media company over a poll they didn't like.
No, but that's
I'm saying is
Trump is Trump just goes all out. Okay, I want to say full something else, but I'll save it. But that's what he does. But he's less subtle about it, I guess. I'm only just contextualizing it in that so that people should understand that remember when Bernie, what did he say on the campaign trail?
About Washington Post?
Yeah, and he was like, who's that owned by? He said, who's that owned by? Something like that. And everyone freaked out at him. But it's just so obvious now, the way that this all works and the way that they use their media companies as tools for their broader empire. Bezos yesterday rolled out a new policy where sources who disagree with the way a story was framed are able to email in their comments about a story. Why do you think he did that? Okay? All right, let's wonder a little bit about why these things work.
Here's what I would say is different, and then we can get to the Liver King story, which also directly involves Joe Rogan and also involves us potentially.
That's right.
what Trump has done differently with his administration, I did a long monologue about this previously, is there is no longer even the appearance or claim or pretense of neutrality. Yeah. Everyone knows if you get crosswise with Trump, he will get the DOJ after you. He will pull your funding, whether it's Department of Education, whether it's your federal, emergency, whatever it is. There is no pretext of neutrality. It's Versailles. Mm-hmm. You're completely accurate about that. So previously, remember in the Obama administration's big scandal that, allegedly there were tax statuses being revoked by the IRS in a political manner. This was a giant scandal, okay? This would go unremarked upon. I don't even know there'd be a news article about it. It's just.
What was that woman's name? It was like
Lois Lerner.
Lois, yeah.
It is so, that is what has truly been transformed about the government under Trump, is everyone expects that every single aspect, every agency head, every lever that they can use against you, they will. And so that means that, if Trump threatens to sue you, that carries a lot of power. If they're going out, if they're if university that they're going after, if it's a state they're going after, it contains even more power. Not that it hasn't always been, the federal government has always had a lot of power, but now there's not even a pretense of neutrality whatsoever. So they can go after you, and it's barely even a scandal that they're doing it in a politically motivated way. So that's what I think is, that's what the Rubicon Trump has truly crossed, and, a way in which he has truly changed the nature of the relationship that people expect from the federal government vis-a-vis the citizens and civil society is what I would say.
I don't really disagree with any of that. All right, let's get over to Liver King, shall we? Yes, again, just to bring it full circle, because we were in the Liver King documentary, and this also involves Joe Rogan, and it's a fun story to end on. After an insane couple of weeks, Liver King has found himself under arrest in the city of Austin. Let's go ahead and put some of that video up there on the screen. After issuing, quote, terroristic threats against Joe Rogan. Liver King, his real name is Brian Johnson, as revealed in the documentary, and as he often would talk about on his social media platform. Let's be honest, this guy has totally lost it. He appears, he looks terrible. Who knows exactly what's going on with him, whether he's on something or whether he's withdrawing from the steroids that he admitted to taking after lying to everybody about not taking steroids. But the point, actually, as a sociological phenomenon, is important to see, because, look, Liver King is a bullshit artist. This is a guy who, again, lied about taking steroids, sold I think it was like $100 million or something like that in supplements. He pulled off a bunch of stunts to popularize the carnivore diet, fine, but really was like selling a vision and lifestyle centered around a body, which just fundamentally he was lying about. And everybody kind of knew he was lying, but the proof eventually being released by my friend Derek over at More Plates, More Dates just really revealed him to be a total fraud, and he tried to have his whole redemption arc. But what this just demonstrates is also, so many people were looking up to Liver King at that time. It's important to remember, that a huge part of his audience was like teenage males who weren't really able to discern a lot of this. And so, in the hopes of being able to show people what the downside of an, frankly, unhinged, lying personality of somebody who's willing to perpetrate, first of all, like this massive attention grab and all this ridiculous shit that he was doing. But also look at the downside of this, like he's literally melting down on his Instagram page, now being arrested by the police, and is obviously unhinged. Like, he looks terrible. I genuinely hope he gets the help that he needs.
He needs to be committed.
His wife and his kids, you guys need to step up here, man, because this is a crash out of epic proportions. Take control, because this is not good. Whatever it is.
I'll tell you, I watched a documentary last night about him, that Saagar's monologue. It builds to a crescendo, and it wraps up with Saagar's monologue. Also, my voice is briefly in it as well from our Joe Rogan appearance. I forgot that we talked about this.
I forgot about it too.
And Joe's like, I knew he was a fraud. And I'm like, oh, just based on how he looks. So in any case, we've been following it. He was obviously not on my radar. I wasn't really the key demographic that they were going after. But what jumps out in the documentary is, first of all, you feel terrible for these boys, his kids.
I do. I know those children are used as props to basically sell a lifestyle.
And all this weird shit he has them do. I mean, I feel bad for those kids. I think we need to get like child influence, like parents using kids as influencers. There needs to be laws and regulation around this because it is sickening. It's a huge industry and it's grotesque. And so first and foremost, you feel bad for these kids. Secondly, you are wondering what is the wife is just going along with all of this, like what is happening? And then third it was so disturbing to me that this is someone who so many young men looked up to as a role model. When this person is the polar opposite of who a role model should be. I mean, now he's had the full mental break, but this was not a well person. And obviously his whole thing is built on a lie. He is a con artist. It is complete fraud. I mean, I think a lot of his origin story too is probably a fraud, which involved his kids, by the way.
Nobody knows.
Like you can't take any of this for granted now because his big selling point was I look like this because of these 9 ancestral principles or whatever.
Tenets.
And 9 ancestral tenets. And that was all total and complete bullshit. And it wasn't like he just didn't answer the question. Multiple podcasts he'd go on and they'd say, are you on?
That's what I mean. He was
absolutely not. No, I know people can't believe it. I love when I get this question, but no, it's all natural and you need to stop limiting yourself and believing that this isn't possible for you too, blah, blah, blah. So this is a con artist, a charlatan, a fraud, someone who is clearly like deeply insecure and in some sort of mental anxiety, anguish, etc., and becomes an icon and a role model for millions. I mean, that it does bring you back to the point of like, we have to do some self-reflection about what state young men are in, that this would be appealing to them, and so many people would gravitate to such an obvious charlatan. So that was the piece for me. And then, I watched a bunch of videos of him just like hunting Joe Rogan throughout Austin. And I think effectively, like, he has in his mental collapse fixated like a stalker on Rogan as the source of his downfall because Joe had said, several things about him.
He was the most prominent person to be like, that guy's a liar.
Before it even officially came out. Yes. And then he had Derek on the podcast to go through all of the total evidence, like the leaked emails and everything that just proved that he absolutely was a fraud and a liar. And so it seems like this guy is completely fixated on Joe. He's hunting him. He shows up in Austin. He's making these direct threats. And he's carrying around this briefcase that has the Joe Rogan Experience logo, which includes his face, of course, on it. And at one point, he opens it briefly. And if you do freeze frame of what's inside of it, there's at least one gun in there.
Yeah.
And he's saying, he's saying he wants to fight him and he's coming after him and all of these sorts of things. So I think that's what probably led to them feeling like, okay, we've got enough that we've got to arrest this guy. But yeah,
I'm actually glad. I'm glad that they arrested him because you can't just be rolling around threatening people with guns on social media. I mean, look, we have some video of this. I'm going to play it for you. You guys, this guy's lost it. Okay, let's watch.
Because Joe Rogan, we don't have to make videos to pretend anymore. All of this is happening. We're coming to you. I've challenged you man to man to a fight. Honorable. And we don't have to pretend or make any videos. The world is watching. They'll make the videos for us. And you don't have to hold a camera. You can hold the hand of somebody that you love because what happens next to you, you're going to need to remember that feeling. You're going to need something more than what you did to give you something to fight for, because I have my family to fight for. That's what warriors do. You and Andrew Tate are good warriors. But you're actually better than that real tension we have. Comedy that you do is good and true.
Yeah, it's creepy, man. I mean, beyond creepy. It's terrifying, honestly. So I'm glad that they pressed charges because this type of behavior is just ridiculous. And honestly, we all hope Brian, not the Liver King, gets the help that he deserves.
Yeah, look at those pupils. One is like triple the size of the other. There's a lot going on there. And he needs mental help. That's very clear. And frankly, like the kids are one thing, I don't know what age they are at this point, but this is their dad, et cetera. But shame on his wife and his handlers and whoever's getting paid by him, whatever.
Oh yeah,
for letting it get to this point. letting it get to this point is just absolutely.
It's sad. All right. Maybe they can play this in the follow-up documentary. This is going to be in volume 2, the Liver King downfall, shall we?
Yeah,
all right. It's been a great week. Thank you all so much. There'll be a great Friday show for everybody tomorrow. But otherwise, we will see you all next week.